excited to be able to present our fifth and final bond overview topic this evening, that being design and construction overview. This is an appropriate topic, I think, to end with because it pulls together all of the previous presentations that we've made, and I think you'll see a connection as we get started with the very exciting work associated with the bond measure. Certainly great news to hear that the bond sale is moving forward, and that will be providing the resources needed to continue on with the very important improvements that we'll be making at our schools. After tonight's presentation, we'll, starting the end of April, we'll begin regular monthly reporting to you, and we'll be providing information at that session that I think will provide additional context so that you can continue tracking the work as it progresses. Tonight, these are the topics that we're planning to touch on, and I think that in terms of what we are looking at, it will provide you a perspective or a framework for what staff will be sharing on a regular basis to you, and will help in terms of monitoring implementation of the 2012 bond. Our topic tonight describes program level activities and project level pre-design, design, construction phase, and post-occupancy phases. I like to refer to these as our project life cycle, and as we'll see as we work through this material, it really is very much of an aligned process, and we move from one phase to the next, culminating in completion of the work, and of course the ability of our schools to use the improvements. Starting at the program level, I'd like to highlight the fact that we are beginning a number of initiatives that will inform the work that will go to each of the specific projects, beginning with our educational specifications, which is closely connected with our facilities visioning process. That entails listening to community and getting perspective from a number of voices that we don't traditionally hear from. As we've gone through this first phase of the work, we have actually found a number of unique perspectives that we haven't traditionally heard from. And I think it'll be important because it reflects on what these groups are looking for in our school facilities. It's certainly something that we want to take into account. As we move out of this visioning phase, we'll be more into the development of the ed spec itself, which is an important document that describes the physical characteristics of our school improvements, and will be very informative to our design teams as they begin the work, particularly at our high schools and at replacement of Fabian. Closely aligned with the educational specifications are what we term design guidelines or construction design guidelines. And these are documents that align with our ed spec that permit the district to specify its preferences relative to a number of factors in the design. Factors such as use of proprietary specification, which you as a school board get involved in if we make a recommendation to provide proprietary items. Also, we provide criteria on the type of roof systems, what type of warranties we're looking for, really delineate what's important to the district, and then apply that uniformly across all of our improvement work. The first project level activity that I'd like to describe as a pre-design activity is site master planning. You may recall in our bond measure that we felt it was important to look at the entire site that the school resides on, and to master plan, if you will, all aspects of the site, including the work that's in the bond. So in the case of Roosevelt High School, for example, the bond involves the full modernization of the school, but there's also other factors on the site that need to be taken into account. An updated site master plan will also inform as we look at doing other work at the site. And of course, the schools that aren't in this bond have master planning efforts associated with them that will help frame what we'll be looking at in future bond measures. In terms of the master planning outcomes, this is a description of what we typically look for from them. And I'd like to highlight your role as a school board in approving these documents. Staff will be making presentation to you and describe the different aspects of the site, which I think will be very beneficial as we then move into our project design phases. Just an example of what a site master plan might look like in terms of a drawing and a little photograph of some teams working on these together. Site master planning will involve our community, will involve building level, all of the operations staff, teaching and learning staff at the district, and I think we'll have a really good product that will jumpstart the actual work to the project itself. As we get into the traditional design phases, this is an example of something that you've seen in our conceptual schedule. And some of the terms at the time may have been a little elusive, but in looking at this bar for Roosevelt High School, we show the alignment of the master plan to our different design phases. And our design phases are actually broken up into the three there, the schematic, design development, work, and then into our construction documents. And I'll briefly touch on those to provide some context for you. Schematic design follows the master planning, and just to highlight, the master planning is only applying to our three high schools, Roosevelt, Franklin, and Grant, and to the replacement of Fabian. And the master planning for Fabian, of course, will look very different than the high schools, in part due to the partnership that we have with Concordia University. For the other work we're doing, the summer improvement projects, we won't actually be doing master planning for those, but we will be doing schematic design phase work. And this is really the beginning, where the design team, which includes an architect engineer firm, will look at the work scope, start to draw and develop some conceptual diagrams, and start to provide some perspective. Another really important outcome of schematic design phase is this is where we connect the budget and the schedule and the scope quality features of the project. The architect and the design team spend a huge amount of time ensuring that we get that right and that we connect those components of the project. During schematic design phase, just like during master plan work, we also engage the community, and we get a lot of input in terms of what the schematic drawings will look like, in terms of how it fits what voters had approved in the bond measure. We conduct a series of public design charrettes, and it's just a term that describes a process where we engage groups who have an opportunity to look at the schematic drawings, ask questions, provide input. We also are planning to have design advisory groups for the full modernizations at the high schools. And Fabian, when we made the presentation on community engagement earlier, we highlighted some of the features of the design advisory groups. And these groups will be customized, will be specific to each one of those 4 sites. And I think we'll have a lot of value added for the design team. Like the master plan phase, the schematic design phase, we also like to bring forward to you so you can get a better sense of how we're connecting the components identified in the master plan and see how the budget and the schedule and the scope all connect. There's a couple of photos depicting what charrette environments look like. We've actually done a number of these over several years. Most recently, the Modern Learning Symposium that was held, where a number of our teachers were able to participate and start to brainstorm what modern learning environments look like. I mentioned the schematic design phase. This is an example of what the level of detail resembles when you look at the work. Over on the lower left-hand side of the screen is a adjacency diagram, which starts to describe the relationships between different spaces in the school. Following completion of schematic design, the design team moves into a really important phase called design development, or DD. And this is where they start to synthesize the concepts that came out during schematic, and they start to frame the work in terms of the construction documents themselves, which become the bid documents that are then used to compete among builders who, of course, will actually be doing the work to affect the improvements. Like during schematic phase, we'll continue to engage our design advisory group and community, as well as multiple district staff level, and look at the work in terms of how we're actually going to implement it. Another important aspect is to determine what our procurement strategy is, whether we do this traditional design, bid, build, whether we look at alternative procurement, which includes CMGC, construction manager, general contractor, and we start to frame the documents depending on what method is actually used. Again, to highlight your role as a school board, if staff ends up recommending use of CMGC, we would be presenting this to you at a formal hearing, and we actually would develop findings with recommendations and provide the public an opportunity to comment on that. A couple of pictures of design development, and you can see increasing levels of clarity relative to the drawings, relative to the site. Construction document phase is the one where the rubber meets the road for the architect and for the design team, and this culminates in completion of bidding documents or contract documents that fully describe the nature of the work and allow builders to be able to bid on the work, propose on the work, and then to really start setting the stage for getting the work executed. This is where we inject our equity in public purchasing and contracting, where we establish protocols in our bid documents to ensure that the contractors are doing appropriate outreach and are targeting underrepresented segments of the business community. Like the other phases I mentioned for master planning and schematic design, you as a board are also involved in terms of approving recommendations from staff on awards. And later this month, we'll actually be presenting several packages, several award recommendations for the summer work. And we'll be providing a level of detail for you to see what type of competition we received and some of the aspects of the bid process itself. It's an example of a drawing of what a page might look like in a set of construction documents. Again, more detail than the previous phases. During construction itself, after the bid work, depending on whether we use traditional or CMGC, and there are some slight differences in terms of how we get here, construction begins as the contractors are given a notice to proceed, and the contract itself describes the relationship between the school district and the builder. It also describes the relationship of our design team, because our architect engineer firms stay with us through the construction phase. It describes these features, and very important to have this construction documentation done accurately and have it done in a manner that the contractor, the builder, can construct it as intended. Introducing the term substantial completion, that's a contractual term that defines our ability to use the improvements per the contract. Substantial completion, however, does not mean that the school is ready for kids. And so as we look at completing the construction, we also have to ensure that all the furniture, fixture, and equipment is all in place, has been set up, has been configured, all of the building systems have been tested, the building commissioned, if you will, and that it is ready. Terminology here that we like to use is complete and usable. And of course, for the projects for this summer, for example, we want complete and usable facilities such that students can use the improvements immediately upon the start of school in September. And finally, the post-occupancy phase is one that you don't like to lose sight of, because the nature of construction is one that there are often issues that surface typically during the first 12 months after completion. Post-occupancy actually begins at the establishment of substantial completion. So there's typically punch list, remaining work that needs to be completed, contract closeout activities, and staff continues to manage this to ensure that this is done correctly. We also start the warranty phase of the work after establishment of substantial completion. That runs typically for 12 months, in some instances longer. And again, staff has a role to ensure that warranty issues are identified and corrected. We also do a significant amount of staff training, both at the building level as well as for our maintenance staff, and ensure that we understand how the building needs to operate. And of course, we're looking for a seamless handoff to operations and maintenance. One of the really important stakeholder groups as we do the design are the maintenance staff, our operations staff, building level, who are going to be involved in having to operate and maintain the facility. Finally, next steps. Staff intends to begin a series of monthly reports to you, actually beginning on the 29th, as I mentioned earlier. We'll provide more detail at that meeting. We also are anticipating doing quarterly reports by the Bond Accountability Committee. I know Director Knowles recently met with Kevin Spellman, the chair of the Bond Accountability Committee, regarding reporting format, and as an independent group reporting directly to you. They'll be reporting information about how they've been viewing the work as staff gets started with program execution. Again, I summarized board actions. The ones that are coming up here very shortly are approval of staff recommendations for construction for the summer work, and we actually have 4 packages that'll be coming forward to you, 2 on the 29th of April, and then 2 more on the 6th of May, and those will actually be incorporated on the consent agenda. So it'll be, which actually follows my presentation. So it'll be information that will include in your board packages, and you'll be able to see some of the detail relative to these multi-million-dollar contracts. And then finally, probably in late June, perhaps early July, we'll be presenting recommendations for design professional services contracts for our 2 big high school projects, so for both Roosevelt and for Franklin. We're competing those separately, and so we will be going through a process, RFP process, to select the most qualified firm to do that work. Okay, at this time I'd like to entertain any questions or comments you may have.
So when you mentioned handoff to operations, Jim, it made me think about the participation of custodians and food service workers and all of those kinds of people. We're including them in the charrettes and whatnot, because I know I've been on some tours with the custodians, and they've told me some horror stories about some of the things that we've selected in the past in some of our schools. So
very important stakeholder group, okay. And I can assure you they are
great.
Going to be involved in the work, actually being at master planning and through the full design phase. As we get into construction phase, they'll also be touring the incomplete construction and having an opportunity to see the work before we get to the completion.
Thank you.
Can I just highlight when we talk about schematic design and design, like there's a lot of design elements, and each one gets a little bit more specific. And while it's not as public in the summer work that we're doing, those phases exist in construction. And I've already heard some confusion about our summer work from some of the schools about saying, boy, there are all these consultants flying around, you're spending all this money on consultants and no work. So I point that out not because the confusion is crazy or not right-minded, but just it highlights how important our communication is about what design and how this works, because those of us aren't in construction don't understand the industry, and it seems like, wow, first the architects come in, and then there's a construction company that changes it all up, and then there's another group that comes in, and why can't I just get my answer? So can you maybe talk a little bit? I don't know if we've hired yet for the communication, but what is our plan even for the summer groups to communicate how this process is going to look?
That's a great question, and certainly would second that this is not something that is commonly understood, and this is a very process-rich type of work, and it requires a lot of very thoughtful purpose in terms of how it's put together. Through our outreach efforts with a number of community groups, we've been taking time to explain this process, and part of what our communication strategy is to highlight these details and to not only place it in our website, but also through use of social media and other forums. We are speaking to a number of groups, PTAs, community associations, and highlighting the work. We're spending quite a bit of time with our building level staff, particularly the principals and the vice principals, to explain the nature of this so that they're not caught flat-footed with it and are also able to articulate it. But very important as we get started in this work, there has been a certain amount of angst around the summer 2013 improvement work and the way we got started with it, really starting with Alameda and the large grant that we got from the state, and then adding the additional schools. And of course, this is our first bite at the apple, so to speak, for the bond work. But it's actually been progressing very much on schedule, and I think many in the community will recognize as the contractors mobilize on site and they start seeing presence with materials, with construction trailers. We do plan signage around the bond that we will be placing at the site. I think there will be a greater understanding of it, and then as the work continues over a very short time frame, I know there will be a lot of engagement to make sure the work is understood.
Great.
I don't know if that fully responds, but that's.
I think it does.
summary.
Again, I just, hearing that feedback, and as we know we all want to get this right, and I have faith that we will, but just reminding us that communicating in the forefront, because again, it's not a process, at least to me, that's intuitive. It's helpful. Thanks. No other questions? Thank you.